Bad movies, just like the award shows, like the Oscars, sometimes have a tendency to drag on and not actually end up getting us anywhere. We find that this theme is just as true in real life as it is with award shows and terrible movies. Because as it was reported by the BBC on January 14th of 2014, Colombia has been engaged in peace talks with rebel groups, specifically the FARC, in Havana for over a year. Now, unfortunately, these talks aren't really getting anywhere, because as it was reported by the San Francisco Chronicle on January 18th of 2014, that Colombia is due for a presidential election this year. But unfortunately, one of the presidential candidates' convoys came under attack by FARC rebels. Now, obviously, this left the government somewhat nonplussed. So, because of this question of tensions and ongoing conflict between both the FARC rebels and the Colombian government, it's key that we ask the question today. Can the Colombian government come to a peace agreement with the FARC? And we find that the answer ends up being no, because tensions are far too high between both groups. And we can understand this through three areas of analysis. First, because of the ongoing nature of the conflict. Second, because of the lack of control that FARC rebels have. And finally, because we find that the Colombian government isn't actually fully committed to the peace talks. So first, when we look to the ongoing nature of the conflict. For any conflict to actually find a peaceful resolution, both sides usually have to stop fighting. That's usually a key part of an agreement. But unfortunately, because of this, we find that the peace talks will ultimately end up failing. Because as it was reported by the Christian Science Monitor on February 20th of 2014, Colombian forces ended up killing 14 FARC rebels in a raid. Now, obviously, this doesn't make FARC very happy and just pisses them off more and makes them want to go and attack Colombian forces all that much more. Now, this is unfortunately nothing new for Colombia or the FARC rebels, because as it was reported by the Washington Post on January 17th of 2014, the conflict has been going on for almost half a century. And additionally, as it was reported by the Star on January 19th of 2014, the conflict has actually ended up claiming over 200,000 lives. So because of the entrenched sides and because of the feelings on both sides as a result of this conflict, it just means that neither side will actually come to the negotiating table with full faith and credit in the other side. Basically, they're both really angry at each other and they don't really want to come to an agreement. They're just putting on a show. So we can see how this is key in answering this part of the question and the fact that neither side will actually fully reach a peace agreement. So, in order to better understand this part of the question as well, we also need to understand how FARC needs to actually have control over the rebels, and specifically their own rebels. But unfortunately, they don't. Because as it was reported by the New York Times on January 18th of 2014, despite calls for leaders of the FARC for FARC rebels to stop fighting, they've actually failed to do so. Meaning that they've just gone out and attacked Colombian forces even further, meaning that unfortunately nothing has happened despite ongoing talks. But even more so, FARC doesn't even like their own group. They're kind of like a catty group in Mean Girls. As it was reported by the South China Morning Post on February 20th of 2014, FARC group leaders, FARC rebel leaders rather, are actually criticizing their own guerrillas, saying that they should actually listen to them and stop fighting, put down their guns, so they can actually come to the negotiating table with full faith and credit. But unfortunately, that isn't happening, as we can see that both sides are still fighting off and on again. But additionally, as was reported by the Council on Foreign Relations on January 20th of 2014, it's not just at the individual level that FARC doesn't have any power, but even at the negotiating table, FARC doesn't have any power. Because specifically, FARC wants the talks that are currently ongoing between the Colombian government and FARC to actually be three-party talks. They want to have the U.S. government involved in these talks, because specifically they find the U.S. government pulls the strings with Colombia. They feel that they would have much more power and be a non-partial observer or a non-partial negotiator. But Colombia doesn't want this. In fact, they say that they wouldn't agree to any such thing, and they wouldn't want this as part of the negotiation package. So because of this, FARC doesn't have any control, means they don't have any power, means that because of this, FARC isn't going to agree to anything that Colombia puts forth. So we can see how in the end, when the question comes into play, FARC can't come to an agreement with Colombia. But additionally, we need to look at how Colombia sees this. And we find that Colombia is actually saying one thing, but ends up doing another. Because as it was reported by CNN on January 20th of 2014, the Colombian government states that it hopes to find peace with the FARC rebels this year. But unfortunately, it's only saying that. It's putting out good PR. Because as it was reported by the Global Post on January 19th of 2014, the Colombian government is actually stepping up military raids against FARC leaders. They're cracking down on them even harder, which of course doesn't bode all that well for any sort of peace negotiations when you're in a shooting war with the people at the other side of the table. But even furthermore, we see that the Colombian government isn't fully committed because they aren't including all of the rebel groups. And by not including all of the rebel groups, it just further reflects poorly upon FARC. Because as it was reported by Al Jazeera on January 17th of 2014, Colombia isn't including the ELN separatist group, which is separate from FARC, but is still a part of it and still considered a rebel group. So by not being fully inclusionary, and because of this activity we of course want to include everybody, it means that ultimately Colombia doesn't have full faith and credit, and they're not actually being genuine in what they say. So any sort of agreement that would potentially be on the table, FARC will of course end up ignoring. So when we return to the question today, can the Colombian government come to a peace agreement with the FARC? And we found that the answer ended up being no, because tensions ended up being too high between both groups. And we understood this first because, of course, FARC ends up having no control, there's an ongoing conflict and the ongoing nature of the conflict, but finally, we understand that Colombia isn't fully committed. So, just like in the end, on bad movies and bad shows are bad, this will continue to go on forever.